Tortoise foods are a controversial topic at the best of times, and it's hard to overstate just how much argument there can be on the internet regarding preformed tortoise foods. And something we've touched on a little bit before is things like the ProRep kind of extruded pellets, which is basically a grass pellet, but it's extruded into this kind of tough. It's quite difficult to feed, and today's video is going to be touching on the new version of this formulation. Now, a heads up, as you will have seen at the start of the video, I did receive this product for free when I was at Pat's recently. So just a quick heads up on that. So technically this would be considered an advert, because that is, in the UK we have rules on what is considered payment, and a free product is considered payment according to the Advertising Standards Authority. So technically I've received payment for this, although no money has exchanged hands, and yeah, all that good stuff. So let's swipe that out of the way. That's the old formulation, and this is the new one. It comes in a bag, and I don't know if that's a rename to Advanced. I can't remember if the old one had the word Advanced. I've looked at it open at the show, but I'm going to open it here for us to have a quick look at, and then we're going to compare it to some other things that I think are quite similar and it's worth comparing to. So this says it uses 31 natural grasses and weeds, and there's a list of ingredients, etc. on the back. Something I've noticed that is quite interesting, again, they've kept this thing that says do not soak. Now, they've not put it in bold this time, it was in bold previously, but do not soak is such an interesting thing with these foods, because really you can't not soak them. It's kind of an interesting instruction. This food is made in the EU. It's made by a company called Van Dijk, which is in the Netherlands, and they make food for like Olympic horse athletes and all this sort of crazy stuff. So they're a pretty well-known food manufacturer. So let's have a quick look at what it is. It's all EU-based and imported into the country. So let's have a quick look. Okay, so right off the bat, you can see we've still got some extruded pellets in here, but we've got some dry cob-style pellets, which I'll compare it to in a second, just what it reminds me of. And then what looks like carrot, and that is listed on the ingredients, so that probably is carrot. And what else have we got here? Yeah, that's more of that extruded style, but it looks like it's been kind of crumbled a little bit. And then we've got this, which I'm not 100% sure what that is. Maybe someone can advise what that could be. Of the ingredients, maybe the apple, although I'm not sure. So there's your food, and I'm going to soak some, even though it says don't, because there's no way I would feed this, especially to a young tortoise. Maybe that would, but I would always soak this. There's no way I would not soak this, to be honest. It looks pretty good. It smells pretty good. I even tasted it at Pat's. Yeah, it smells like horse food, right? It smells like grass and things like that. So it's, in terms of that, it's certainly better than a lot of commercial diets that we see on the internet. And, you know, things like ryegrass and all this sort of stuff, plantains and things like that. Pretty good ingredients. There's obviously always going to be some controversy over the inclusion of things like potato starch and brewer's yeast for aided digestion, because these are hindgut fermenters, so there would be an argument to say that we shouldn't really include things like that. And obviously there's lots of little additives in terms of vitamins and things like that. It does actually say that it provides a low-level supplementation, but kind of, in my opinion, it should really say why on this. Now, at Pat's, they did have this kind of sheet that went through each ingredient and showed why they've included it. But it would be nice for them to, I think, have some information on why it's considered low level. Maybe, you know, it's for use with a supplemented lighting system or a wider feeding regimen of different foods. This food does say that it's a complete diet on the back, but it's advised that it's fed alongside a variety of other plants as well, but it doesn't really name any plants outright, which is, I think, is fair, to be honest. Generally, these sort of things are suitable for your Hermans, sulcata, horsefields, marginateds, and Greeks, and things like that. So this is what that is marketed for. It's not necessarily marketed for your tropical species, such as your redfoots, etc. So what does it remind me of? Well, the main thing that this cob really reminds me of is the infamous and widely considered the best tortoise food, which is the Agrob's testudo, which is this, which is a cob. And you can kind of see, if I get one of the smaller pieces out of this little bucket that I've got here, it kind of just looks the same. Especially, I mean, you know, if I dropped one of these into the bag and shook it up, I'd not be able to find it again, because it's so similar. there's an argument to say it's probably a very similar, if not identical, product, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Agrobs is, like I say, widely considered the best tortoise food. I use it as part of a ration for pretty much every feed. It's effectively dried grasses and meadow hays and things like that, and you can soak it to kind of break it up, and they advise soaking it. But again, Agrobs is literally a horse food manufacturer, so there's not necessarily anything wrong with using a horse food manufacturer to manufacture your tortoise food. They have a very similar gut system. They eat a lot of the similar foods, a lot of graze, and this sort of stuff is, you know, really good for getting that high long stem fiber into the diet of a tortoise. And of course, like I say, there is controversy over feeding tortoises kind of man-made foods in captivity anyway, but we're going to kind of ignore that for the sake of this because I've already covered that kind of stuff on the website quite a few times, so there's no need to cover it here. The food that I basically think this is trying to compete with is the Arcadia version, which is the Optimised52, which is this one here, which we've talked about before on the channel. It kind of comes in these quite, you know, large cubes. And this is made in the UK, but it's made using EU ingredients, so it's a similar formulation, if you like. They say 52. This kind of contains at least 52 plants, but then this says 60. So I'm not quite sure on which number they want to go with. But it's you know, it's much better food than the sort of rubbish that we would see a lot lining pet shop shelves. Again, it's essentially a grassy long stem fiber, effectively a horse food or a rabbit food of that kind. This stuff is made in the UK, like I say, using EU ingredients by Norfolk Feeds. They make this one. They have a very similar product of their own called Tortoise Cubes. Again, we've touched that before on the channel. But yeah, these foods can, I think, definitely a step in the right direction in terms of feeding your tortoise an appropriate diet. And if I was to choose between this and the terrible extruded little multicolored pellets, this every day of the week, and especially for a new keeper who isn't really sure on what they're going to feed and how they're going to feed and all that sort of stuff, these sorts of foods are really good for that. So I think that they do definitely have their place in this sense. Like I say, there is a lot of controversy and people can argue their head off on that. These two foods, both pretty good. I think this one retails, this is what, the 500 gram bag? I think this retails for about £12 in the UK. Don't quote me on that, I'm not sure. And I'm totally not sure what this one retails for. Absolutely not sure. Like I say, I picked it up at Pat's from the Peregrine stand. And that is it. I'm going to go and soak it and let's see what some tortoises do with it. So I guess let's add some of the Arcadia food into this bowl. There are instructions on the box to kind of give you some idea as to how much water you should put in, but I'm a big fan of just putting water in and letting it do its thing. So we're going to do that. And I'm pretty sure they also recommend kind of grabbing some of the bits from the bottom of the bag and putting them in as well. So that's what I've done. And then we'll take the ProRep one and we'll pop that into this bowl. Again, I'm just kind of going to give it a guess. I'm not weighing these out. I'm just going to give it a guess as to how much I'm going to put in. Let's add some water. Something I like to do if I'm soaking any food is to add a liquid calcium or electrolyte supplement to the water. It's not the most bioavailable form of calcium, but it's certainly better than no calcium at all. And I live in a very soft water area, so I like to add some calcium to my water. So I've done that, and I'll just kind of put, I guess, that much. I don't really know. Again, there are instructions, at least for the Arcadia one, there are instructions on how to soak it. Something like a few teaspoons per cube, but I'm putting more than that in because that's the way we're going to do it. So let's have a time lapse. Let's see, should we do a time lapse? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So it's been a good 5 minutes. Let's have a quick look. So the Arcadia one has done what the Arcadia one does, which is mush up quite well. Hasn't turned nearly as green as I've seen some of the batches turn. Some of the batches turn really green, almost like spirulina level of green. If you've ever worked with spirulina, it goes this really deep green color. I think it's maybe an ingredient that they've put in some of the newer batches to really bring out the green. I'm not sure. And then let's have a look at the ProRep one. Okay, so it's done the exact same. Some of the, let's have a feel. What I'm feeling for is to see if the thick pellets have kind of done their job. So those thicker pellets that we had, if I grab one of those, you can see those there. So because they're thicker and they're much tougher, in theory they shouldn't absorb water as quickly, and they are softening right up, so that's not too bad. And I think a little bit longer would potentially help with that as well. Maybe 10 minutes rather than 5 minutes. Again, it doesn't really give you a time on the bag because it actively says don't soak them, actually. Let's have a quick look here. Find one of these carrot pieces. Okay, so that's softened right up. Again, carrot is a controversial ingredient anyway, so you could, in theory, pick those out. I'm not overly concerned. It's certainly not the best ingredient for tortoises, and I'm not really endorsing using it. For the sake of this, I'm not overly concerned for the sake of what I'm doing today. I'm going to feed this to some animals, and I'm not too worried if it gets into the mouths of a few animals. However, feeding it on a regular basis, and by regular, I even mean semi-regular, once a month, really, carrot shouldn't really be done. If a tortoise eats a bit of carrot, it's not going to do any harm, but if it eats on a regular basis, that's where it can become a chronic issue. So there's a piece here I've just noticed that really hasn't soaked any water at all, and it's still quite dry in the center. So again, maybe 10 minutes with this would be much, much better. Again, it's not going to do any harm if they get this in the mouth, but it's very tough indeed. Interesting. I'm going to give it a quick sniff whilst it's this wet, because the stuff at Pat's that I sniffed was not this wet at all. I have put way too much water in here. You would have to drain this. Let me give it a quick sniff. Okay, yep, smells like horse food, like grass, like tortoise food. It just smells like that. And the Arcadia Optimised52 smells very similar, of course, because it's basically grasses and herbs. Let's do a quick zoom in and have a look at the Arcadia food has a lot of these longer fibres. There's quite a few small ones in there, but part of me feels like a very young tortoise might not be great with this, just because it's not quite soft. Now, that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just an observation. I have fed this to young tortoises and they've been fine from all of my anecdotal observations, but it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because there's these bigger pieces that I think a young tortoise might struggle with. But again, that's not a bad thing, because they would find food in the wild that they would struggle with as well. And that's part of, grinding down their beak, and all of that kind of stuff comes with that, is the struggle of ripping these fibres apart. So it's not a bad thing, it's just an observation. Let's take a look at the ProRep one. Yes, I've definitely added too much water into this. It is very wet. However, we can squeeze it out and we can see a bit more of what it should really look like. Or in my opinion, what it should look like, which is this kind of much smaller structure to it, so potentially more palatable for a younger tortoise, but still plenty of those long stem fibres, so great for that hindgut fermentation, great for the gut health as a whole, great for the microbiome inside the gut. These small pieces, I think a young tortoise would be able to break these ones that are still a bit tough, and that would act as our dry kind of food. I'm not overly concerned again. The carrot is a questionable ingredient, isn't it? I can't remember what the sheet said about this at Pat's as to why they've included carrot. I'm really not sure. At least I think that's the carrot. I mean, I could be very wrong, obviously. Carrot is listed on the ingredients. And that other piece that we saw earlier, I don't see that anywhere, so I'm not sure what that was. A piece of what I thought was apple. Again, not sure. Interesting, right? So let's go feed it to some animals. Let's see if anybody eats it. Here we have my little group of baby Egyptians. They're indoors because it's currently winter time, or it's certainly cold, at least it feels like it in Manchester. And also in here, we also have 2 Leo Carters. Now, anyone who's read my website will know that I keep 2 young Leo Carters. I recognize that it's a controversial topic. I recognize all of those things. You can read about that on my website as to why I've got them. So we've got these young tortoises in here. The Egyptians are approximately 2.5, 3 years old now. Now, let's take a look. This is the ProRep food. So I'm going to squeeze out some of the excess, and I'm just going to dump a kind of patty of it there, and we'll see what these guys do. So this is 2 of our Egyptians. This is porridge and eggs. So here's eggs and here's porridge. Egg seems to enjoy. Porridge is not impressed. And then coming over here, here's bacon. This is bacon. Bacon seems to be enjoying some. And then right at the back, we can see coming into shot is toast. And then this is one of the Leo Carters. This is pickle. Okay, so we seem to be getting some nice food response. Now, the Leo Carters being a hybrid, there's no real wild diet for these guys, but we can kind of guesstimate that if this were to happen in the wild, it would be a grassy type of diet because of the crossover area of where sulcatas and leopards live. So we could kind of guess that these animals would eat a grass-based diet. So these, in theory, are a good idea for this sort of tortoise. In fact, I think both foods in this case list sulcata as an optional extra species. So they're doing a fantastic job. If anyone's ever kept baby tortoises, this is really typical, is to just be a little bit naughty and kind of sit on top of each other and all those sorts of things. They tend not to mind, to be honest. They're pretty used to it. They're liking it. So far, it seems the Leo Carter hasn't quite gone for it. Okay, bacon's given up. It looks like egg's given up, although potentially egg has been shoved out the way by another tortoise. Okay, so we've had, I would say, a fairly mixed but a relatively positive response. That's the sort of feed response you want. You don't want any sort of super heavy mega eating. You want slow grazing is what you want. These are grazing animals. So that's okay. Let's stick a little bit of the Arcadia stuff in and see if they go for that. Now, they may not do because they may have already had their fill, but we shall see if any of them prefer, for example, the colours of this one or the smells of this one. So Toast is coming over, giving that one a check. Not even slightly interested as Toast. However, again, they did just have a few bites of the other food first, so, you know, that's not to say the Arcadia one isn't preferred. They may have just already had their fill for the 5 minutes. There you go. So there's a potential here for them to decide on which one. They're sniffing the Arcadia food, but they're not taking any bites. Now, if you've ever fed any of these sorts of grass pellet style foods, you'll know that they're an absolute mess to clean up because the hay kind of dries out and spreads everywhere. So I've noticed there's a few bits on the floor. You'll notice there's pieces everywhere. That is literally agrobs from a couple of days ago that's just been spread everywhere. That's just what happens, especially when they're indoors. And when they're indoors, we don't have all of the snails and slugs and all that sort of stuff to eat all of the waste that is left behind. So we just don't get as much of the cleanup going on. So it's a much more of a manual process to clean up after tortoises when they're kept indoors. So we've got a lot of sniffing going on with the Arcadia food. I don't think I've seen much, if any, eating. And the ones that have now gone back to the ProRep food. Again, this may just be today's preference. This isn't necessarily a review of either of these foods. It's more just to show off what kind of foods we've got and how things have changed slightly in the last few years with regards to feeding tortoises. Okay, so we have got some action now on the Arcadia food. Again, anyone who's kept a group of tortoises will know that they do have their little personalities, and some of them just don't like things while some of them do. So we seem to have a 50-50 split here. We seem to have 2 of them preferring the ProRep and 2 of them preferring the Arcadia, which is quite interesting, at least to stand next to. What an interesting little thing. Okay, let's go and try with some of the Hermans. This is the indoor feeding area of my Hermans tortoise shed. So they have access to the outdoors and they also have an indoor shed. If you've ever kept a group of tortoises and you've ever fed them with kind of grass-based pellets, like the agrobs, you will know the feeling of this, which is just the amount that just sometimes doesn't get eaten. It is wintertime here, or at least it's getting colder now, so these guys are cooling right down, so they're not eating nearly as much. But I do still provide them with this sort of low nutrition, at least towards the start of the cooling down season. So for now, what I'm going to do is, this is Billy. Billy is a rescue tortoise. He likes to make himself lost in the garden, so I've stuck a an air tag to him so we can always find him because he likes to just disappear. I'm going to just kind of pile this up over here and I'll throw it away later. I'll put it in the compost later on. It's not too bad. The good thing about this sort of stuff is that it's totally just degradable, right? It's just hay and food and that sort of stuff. And there are 4 tortoises, Hermans tortoises, in this group. Only Billy has joined us at the moment, it looks like. I did see a baby go into the cave not long ago, so that's not a massive problem. So let's see if Billy wants some food, because Billy looks like he's looking for some at least. So I'm just going to kind of do that for now. So this is the ProRep food, and I'll put it on this one, this tile. And I'm kind of just going to... Oh, I should do it the other way, right? There you go. Sorry, Billy, that looks a little bit messy, but that's my fault. And then this is the Arcadia food. And I'm going to get rid of some of the excess kind of moisture there. And there we go. We'll see what kind of he does with that. Now, I'm not expecting either way. Like I say, it has cooled down a heck of a lot, especially in the last few weeks in the area. It's, you know, it's getting really cold at night now. It's nearly 0 degrees Celsius. So we're definitely in the cooler season. So we may not see any food at all, but it's still good to introduce them and show them some new smells and things like that, a bit of enrichment for them anyway. So Billy is giving the Arcadia food a bit of a sniff, but he's not taking any bites just yet. We're going to just leave him and see if he does anything. And whilst he's doing that, I'm going to clean up this pile of microbes and get it ready for... Oh, he's more interested in what I'm doing, to be honest. Hello, pal. Let me put you there, Billy. We'll see what you do. I'm not expecting any action from Billy at all. He's a very good boy. He's very personable, but he's cooling right down at the moment. Yeah, he's giving it a sniff, the Arcadia food. Maybe a slight nibble there. I'm going to try this one, Billy. Like I say, Billy is a rescue. He came to us from the Tortoise Club in Norfolk. They do a really good job of rescuing tortoises up and down the country, obviously mainly in the Norfolk area, but they have this amazing facility, which we need to do a video on, actually. So Billy is eating the ProRep food straight away. So take that as you will. He did go for the carrot piece first. Maybe it was just the carrot that enticed him. Again, quite a controversial ingredient. I'm not overly concerned if he has a little bit of carrot, but I would probably start picking it out of future rations. Nope, okay, he had his carrot and left it. So that's a little bit of an interesting observation. Again, we can't really take anything from that. It's hardly a controlled study, and it's also hardly anything scientific. It's just a quick look at these two foods. As I say, the Arcadia food does seem to have this longer stem, which may be an issue for smaller tortoises, maybe not, versus the ProRep, which is much more kind of, you can make it into much more of a patty if you like. You can't really do that with the Arcadia food. It seems to be much more grassy. Neither a positive nor a negative, it's just an observation at this point. And Billy has decided that that's enough of that for today. So what do we think of both of these tortoise foods? I think in the grand scheme, it's certainly an improvement on what we've seen in the past. Although there is definitely an argument to say that something that has been tried for many, many years and is from the past is Agrob's Testudo, which is arguably still the best. So there is that argument to be made, of course. I'm more talking about what is readily available off the store shelves in your high street shops and your big box stores. These foods will certainly help improve the diet of many tortoises, I hope. I think the main issue they're going to face is the palatability. I think getting tortoises onto this when they're used to the pellets, and also getting stalls to recognize that these are an improvement on the older stuff, especially when tortoises also then don't eat them as quickly and as readily. That's going to be a difficult task. And I think getting the stalls on board with these sorts of products is going to be pretty difficult. That said, I think some of the ingredients are very good, and I obviously have questions about some of the other ingredients in these products. I think they could in theory form a part of a wider varied diet, but it would be nice to see some longer-term testing with both of them, of course. In terms of availability, most stockists have an account with both Monkfield and Peregrine, which are the companies behind these products. So I imagine most reptile stores will be able to stock either of these foods. Most of your online stores will do as well. And your bigger box stores, such as your Pets at Home or your Jollies, should have one or the other on the shelves, at least in the UK. In terms of further abroad, again, I'm really not sure. It would be interesting to see if anybody else has any feedback on these sorts of foods, any experience with this sort of food, or, like I say, the Agrob's Testudo, the tried and tested method of feeding long-stem fibre to your tortoises. These sorts of foods, in theory, could be used alongside other things, which would be quite nice to see. So I think that's pretty much it. That's everything I really wanted to cover. I just wanted to kind of show you both of these foods up close together with each other. This one is the newer one. This one's been out for approximately 12 months now, so it's relatively new as well. I think they're both an improvement on older products, but I think there is still potentially some room for improvement, as always. And with that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, and I will see you when I see you.